Make sure you get best after the submeeting session. So, yeah, over to you, Joram.
Thank you. Testing, yeah. All right, hello. I hope you all had a good lunch. I was just wondering about it being after lunch. I mean, we picked the slots on the agenda ourselves, so we decided to put ourselves after the lunch. That's either incredibly smart or incredibly stupid. I mean, you're all spending energy digesting, not listening. That could be on purpose, or that could be by accident. Well, this presentation will be done by myself and by my good friend there, Mr. Tijs Rademakers. As you can see, we don't have a good picture of the two of us together. So this is a close approximation, and I'll leave it up to your imagination to guess who is who on that picture. But if Tijs stands up, you will notice quickly. Anyway, Tijs, you want to introduce yourself first?
You didn't introduce yourself.
I will do after you.
Oh, thank you.
Easy for you to
Thank you. So I'm Tijs Rademakers. I'll talk about the new Activiti UI in a little bit, or actually quite a long time, because Joram just goes on and on about this new Activiti 6 thing. But you will get there, and when you get the new UI, you know it's really been worthwhile. So all the technical stuff he's going to talk about is not really that fun and important, but yeah, the UI is really cool, so just keep it there. So thank you.
I do hope you have these funny, I have deliberately in my presentation, I have like pause moments where you are supposed to say something funny. You should have rehearsed it. Anyway, so my name is Joram Barrez. I joined Alfresco 5 years ago to work on the Activiti project. We found the Activiti project together with Tom Bynes. We came from JBoss Red Hat JBPM back in the day, so I'm doing this BPM thing for a long time now. Being 5 years with Alfresco now, seeing all the Activiti releases. I released 2 kits in the meantime, so you could say my time at Alfresco has been a productive time. Anyway, brings us to today. There are these defining moments in the history of mankind. Just a random few I could find the pictures of on the internet. The first Earth. No, it's already spoiled, but the first iPhone was released. From our friends at CERN, proved that the Higgs boson particle actually existed. I should say the Higgs boson englobé, because this is Belgian scientist who is pissed off because it's not named in that thing. The finding of the first DNA sequencing in the 50s, the moon landing. I remember my mom and dad once in a while bringing it up that when they were very small, they would be picked up from their beds, put in front of the black and white television, and enjoy that moment live. And they still remember what they were wearing that day, what the air smelled like, what other people were doing. And I think in the year or 10 from now, year or 20 from now, you'll be able to tell your children, grandchildren, Paul, your grandchildren about this day. You could say, I was there when Activiti 6 was, and you will remember what you were wearing, what the air was smelling like, what everybody else was doing. So how did we get there? 5 years ago, like I said, 5 years ago, we joined in March, me and Tom, we joined Alfresco in March 2010. And it's not very visible on the screen, so there's a first blog that we posted back in the day, the first alpha version. And we still have the same logo actually, but we had this cheesy line, and I'm happy you can't read it because it said, makes your workflow. We were young, naive, and we all make mistakes. Anyway, in the past 5 years, we have seen Activiti grow more beyond than we ever imagined. From day one, there was a huge uptake, and we're pretty much now all across the globe, all kinds of scale, from really small, simple paper processes are being replaced to really high-scale system integration, system orchestration, in all sorts of industry, crazy stuff, not so crazy stuff. And this map you can see here on this slide is pretty interesting. That is from the Google Analytics page. I did that 2 days ago. That is the unique visitors from 2015, so January 1, 2015 until 31st of May 2015. You can see that they're pretty much every country at least has one guy or girl who visited the Activiti.org website. I don't know if they got internet here or I hope that. And I think there are much more things to do here than being on the internet and doing BPM, but anyway, you get the picture. Also very interesting is that I took a look at the the past 5 years, so from day one that we launched until today. And what I saw was really, I think, humbling for us as a team was that we saw that we almost had 900,000 unique people visiting us. And this is not, the typical spam bots. These were people spending on average about 3 minutes on the website. I mean, 3 minutes, that's a long time in this age, right? But if you think about it, 900,000 people, that's almost a million. Right? I mean, I can't imagine how a crowd of a million people looks like. That's huge and really humbling that over the 5 years, we're writing our code from our desks at home, behind a laptop with the kids screaming in the background, and you touch almost a million people. That is quite something, and it makes me really humble. At the same time, we have more than 100 contributors had. Still, some of them are, of course, still active. And if you go to GitHub now, you'll see about 100. But you have to remember that we spent 3 years on Subversion in the dark, and I think we had, I can't know the number anymore, 30, 40, 50, could be something like that. So we had definitely more than 100 contributors in that time, and there are very little Java frameworks that ever reach that big a number, different people, different companies. And also today, I mean, I got a list from our marketing department, and this is a list of all the different nationalities registered for this day. I think the turnout was actually quite good. We expected like a 20% people just registering and not coming, which is actually better today. But you can see that there are people from all across the globe. We got people from Slovenia, United States, Colombia, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Ukraine, Vietnam. 25 different nationalities are represented here today. Well, I don't know if everybody's here actually, but I mean, up to 25 nationalities are represented here today. That's quite special. I expected, a huge turnout from France, obviously, from the neighboring countries. A bit disappointed about Netherlands. Yeah. That's the... In general, yeah. Anyway, that brings us to the question of why are we now suddenly slapping a new sticker on it? Why are we calling it Activiti Success? I'm still waiting for your funny moment.
I don't have a microphone.
Oh, you want one?
No.
So, in the past 5 years, if you look back, and it's actually something I have prepared, and let me see if I can find it. So I went into the archives, and geez, this is hard with a microphone. Here we go. I downloaded the first alpha version of Activiti and went to take a look in the user guide. It's not important what is in there, but you can see that much of the stuff that we decided back then, the object API we scrapped for obvious reasons, but if you look at deploying a process definition, how to run, where is this example, and now you're getting started. The whole API, the concepts, the database schema have been, you can't read it now, but trust me, it looks, let me see if I can make it bigger. Here we go. The whole thing looks pretty similar, if you are using Activiti today, that looks, the runtime service was called process service back in the day, but most of the things were, the concepts pretty much matched what we have today. Just quite something in software to be at that stable. So, that has always been our core goal of being stable. Yep, here we go. And we did, on this foundation of what we call the Activiti 5 Foundation, we did about 30 releases, which is pretty awesome for one code base. And also in the past 5 years, the code base has grown seriously. Like I say, there are more than 100 contributors. They come from different companies, different industry, different mindsets, right? So you have to imagine that when you contribute something, you always do it to solve one specific use case. You have a problem with your customer or your company, and you try to solve that. And we are there as, let's say, the gatekeepers trying to fit it within the whole vision. But obviously, if you got that many people contributing, sometimes things, our software grow organically, to put it beautiful. We also have learned a lot about how Activiti is used, and sometimes how it is abused and misused. We get a lot of feedback through open source, to the forums, to various channels. But also we have now, as Paul said, we have a commercial product since a year and a half or something, which is very interesting in the sense that with open source we have one main problem. We are the last person to hear about that you're using Activiti. You only hear about about those use cases when there's a problem, and then you only hear about the problem, right? I've got this exception, how do I fix it? But in open source, it's very hard to actually learn what you're actually trying to do, use cases, the process you're trying to define. And since we started this commercial offering, actually, yeah, there are some benefits, not many, to really doing it purely proprietary, but at least that bit, learning or seeing what your customer is doing, that is what is better, let's say, versus open source. So if you have a use case, please share it with Ivo. He was going to note it all down, right? There we go. So 5 years ago, you see there's a team here, it's the 5. We chose the right things, clean and easy API, Jesus. Standardized BPMN, that was actually pretty, back in the day, I still remember that our CTO, John Newton, asked, do you really think this is going to be the right choice? And we said, of course, yes. Not being very, at that moment, we didn't have any proof that it would be a good choice, but the history has proven us right, because pretty much every vendor, there are a few exceptions, have standardized on BPMN now. I don't need to go over the list. I think many people that are in the room today know this list. The liberal Apache license, having that UI that Tijs talked about, that demonstrates the features from day one, that was really, I think, back in hindsight, things that were really good decisions. And of course, today, all the above still apply, it's very much so. But 5 years is a long time in IT. I mean, there are very little projects who ever reach 5 years with still being used. It's quite amazing if you, I'm thinking about, there are big, obviously like Spring, Hibernate, but very few frameworks, if you think about it, survive that long. Many have like a spike of popularity and then they wind down into obscurity, and it's not like that at all. It always goes, the curve always goes up with Activiti. So I can hear you now thinking about, is he now going to tell us that after 5 years we scrap it all and remove it and, we're going to do it again, but now properly? No, definitely not. So one thing I want to put out before I show you everything is that Activiti 6 is not a rewrite, it's not a new engine. Everything will be the same, the API will be the same, database schema will be the same, concepts will be the same, etc., etc., etc. And I think I put it nicely on this slide. I wrote it myself, so Activiti 6 is an evolution of the core engine, really the core engine you'll see in a moment, taking into account all that we have learned in the past 5 years, and taking into account everything that we as a community believe that we now need to cope with the next 5 years, and in the simplest and cleanest way possible, because you all know you can hack your way around a lot of stuff, but it will bite you back soon. And obviously, after 5 years of having version 5, we were just really tired of putting 5. We're now at version 5.18, something. That almost sounds like an IBM release. So, 6 is all about making sure we are ready for the next 5 years. It's a very cheesy line, but that's the way it is. Basically, that's what we're trying to do. And I'm going to go into some details about why this is necessary, or why we think it is necessary. And feel free to debate with us about that. If you got any questions during this presentation, just rise. We've got an hour and a half. I don't have material for an hour and a half, luckily. But there's some debate, some discussion would be cool. No funny moments, Tijs? Not yet. Jesus, he's building up for a big one, I think. So, did Activiti 6 drop out of the sky like one day? Well, obviously not. That's not how software works, unfortunately. So. It all started almost 2 years ago, July 2013, when I did a prototype with Neo4j, and I think the guys here, they know about that because they contributed some stuff on that too. So I was reading this book about Neo4j, and the graph database seemed pretty interesting because, they process instances, process definitions, they are graphs, so that was a natural fit, and it is a natural fit. Neo4j has transactions, so it was pretty neat. So I did that prototype, and actually I learned a ton about, because I tried out new stuff, for example, decentralized agenda, which I'll talk about later, the operations, the way that we do it now in 6, they were actually, in a basic form, let's say, they were in that prototype. Now, this year, November 2013, fast forward a couple of months, this is a picture of the famous Walton Cottage Hotel. For the people that don't know the Walton Cottage Hotel, anybody knows the Walton Cottage Hotel? Oh, yeah, obviously, yeah. So the Walton Cottage Hotel is closed down now, I heard, sadly. It's a typical British hotel. And if you don't know what a typical British hotel is, you have to imagine something out of a scene from Fawlty Towers. And that's a typical British hotel, I'm not joking here. So the Walton Cottage, typical British hotel, we're sitting down there at the evening having a beer. I was having a gin and tonic, and I remember very, very clearly that Tijs and some other guys were laughing with me because I was drinking a gin and tonic, and Paul was saying it was a girly drink. Looking now what is popular and what's hipster these days, you know, I was a hipster avant la lettre. Anyway, one thing I want to say about the Walton Cottage before we continue is that, pro tip, if you're in the UK, don't eat kippers. Yes, the UK people are laughing now, but anybody has an idea what kippers is? No, I didn't either. So I saw it on the menu in the breakfast, and I asked for kippers, thinking it was some kind of vegetable or whatever. No, it is a fish they slice open and then fry it, right? Supposedly it's good, and UK people like it, but with the Walton Cottage they take it out of this plastic wrap, and then you have like a few centimeters of oil, and then they just throw the fish in, and that's what you get as breakfast. Being a Belgian, that didn't really go well, and I was really sick that day. I don't know if you still remember, but I was seriously sick from that kippers. Never have kippers in the UK. Pro tip. If there's one thing you remember from this, but no, it's true. Anyway, I'm diverting. Walton Cottage, right? So we're sitting there, gin and tonic, me, hipster, and the other guys having a beer. And I did this prototype. So I ported the ideas from Neo4j, ported them to something that looked like Activiti. It wasn't quite Activiti yet, so and I just showed it to Ted and the other guys back in the day. And basically we decided at that moment that, yeah, this could be what we would finally call version 6. We were already tired from the 5 label back in the day. So yeah, basically we decided then, let's try to research more, let's try to prototype more, and that will be what we would call 6. Then in January 2014, Alfresco decided to create a commercial offering around Activiti, which took quite some of our brain power away from Activiti 6. We continued, but not at a high pace as we were. But the good thing is that we met a lot of customers, a lot of prospects, a lot of kind of use cases we saw from people who wanted to buy it that actually made us think about lots of cases that we couldn't do on Activiti 6 today, or some of the people here in the room will remember that the scale, for example, a job executor, we changed that due to having customer talks and having problems with that and trying to scale it to a higher level. I mean, that wouldn't have happened if that commercial thing didn't happen. So, I mean, that's what I want to say with the open source versus the commercial. It isn't all, black and white. We learn a ton from direct discussion with customers. It's a different kind of discussion as with typical open source forum communication. And then fast forward a couple of months, December 2014, we started the work officially between codes, and I don't know if you can read it, but the branch on GitHub is still there. It's called the experimental branch. So we kind of put it under this fake label of experimental so people wouldn't see we're actually using Activiti 6 packages. And pretty much we worked on that for a while until May 2015, that's only last month, right? So this isn't very clear. I'm going to make it a bit bigger because I'm really proud of this graph. That's what the title says. In Activiti engine, the engine alone, we have about 1,600 unit tests, right? So when we started this refactoring, you know how refactoring starts, you rip it all out and you try to rebuild it. So we started with about, I think 600, this should be 600, the projector is really bad. 600 failing units, 700 failing unit tests. And this was, the time. So every day that we did some coding on Activiti 6, I would go in the evening into Excel and fill in, how many issues, how many failing tests we still had. As you can see, when we reached this a couple of weeks ago, that was a very happy moment because at that point, we had proven that Activiti 5 engine was at least, from a unit testing perspective, on par with the Activiti 5 engine. So that was a really special moment for us. We just passed on a Sunday, I think, Tess. I think you did it on a Sunday. Yeah, it's just sad. On a Monday we have champagne, but on a Sunday. Anyway, the design goals for Activiti 6 from the day we basically started with, obviously, and this was non-negotiable, is backwards compatibility with Activiti 5. I will go into detail and show you examples of that later on. Second thing is that we want a simpler runtime structure and execution. And again, I will highlight the problems we have in 5 and show you why this is needed. You won't see it now. And 5 is a very good basis, But once you want to start doing new use cases, you will see why we had to do what we had to do. Third point is that we want to remove some of the bloated parts of the PVM, the process virtual machine. So people that have gone into the engine really deep, you might have seen the PVM classes, they're called, activity, input, execution, input, the atomic operations. If that doesn't ring a bell, don't worry. Then, this is for people really going into deep into the engine. And the problem is that there is some bloat there, and I will also highlight the problem with that and why we think it's better not to have that. Last point is that we got a lot of questions about dynamic support for dynamically changing process instances, process definitions. And I will show to you in a minute why we couldn't do this. But we could do it, it would be a lot of hacking, but why it's better not to do it on the 5 basis structure, but rather try to do it on a cleaner 6 structure. And always, our main goal is performance and performance and performance. You have a question, Igor?
No, not yet.
Okay, I thought you saw your reason. I'm just scratching, okay. Otherwise, you've got questions? If you've already got questions, just, shout. So, like I promised just now, what are the problems with Activity 5? I wouldn't call them problems, maybe that's too harsh, it's more of an inconvenience thing. So the first thing is that we do a model translation from the BPMN XML into what we call the PVM model. So you go from the XML or BPMN representation, we parse that to some Java representation first to work easier with that, and then we parse that model into the PVM data structures, the activity input, the execution input, etc. The problem with that is that those concepts, the PVM, that's really the idea behind, back in the day, was that it was the core state machine. A core state machine not knowing any of the languages that were being run upon it. So that a state machine with some very simple state machine structures and some state machine operations, right? So the problem with that is that there's not one-on-one BPMN concept match, and you have a leakage between layers. And you can't read the example, but I will tell you, because it's quite clear. So this is a custom activity behavior. So what happens is that when you execute a logic, actually you try to catch the exception, and when you catch the exception, you want to go through another sequence flow. You want to take another part out of your behavior. So what happens in Activity 5, to do that, you need to ask your current activity, that's an activity input from the state machine, you have to ask him, give me your transition, and you would get back a PVM transition object, which is, you can't go around it because at that point the model is already parsed to the executable PVM model, and there is no way to, do that in the BPMN way. So you have that leakage between the layers, the PVM leakage to the layers. You can't read a 6 either, I thought it was big enough, but basically in the 6, it's a bit long now, it's in a one-liner. But basically what happens, same logic, you have your behavior, you execute the logic, and when you want to catch the exception, you actually ask the current flow element, that's the concept in BPMN, you ask the current flow element to find a sequence flow with a certain ID. So what happens here is that there's a for loop going through all the outgoing sequence flow and giving that back, and then here saying at the end, hey, execution being the pointer to where you are in the process, you are now in this sequence flow, and then saying to the engine, go ahead with this new state. And that's pretty much it. So you work directly with the BPMN model, which is, reasoning about it gets much easier. Which brings us to this slide. It's hard to reason about patterns in processes when you have to make that translation in your head, right? You have to think, how does this look in the PVM model? How does this look in the BPMN model? And go back and forth. And sometimes it's not easy because sometimes one construct in the PVM matches 3 constructs in the BPMN and the other way around. And the problem is not very clear for simple and even complex processes. But once you hit the really complex ones, and trust me, that happens quickly than you assume. For example, think about, this is the stuff that we didn't try to do to break the engine. Think about nested multi-instance parallel nested embedded subprocesses with a couple of boundary events on top of that, define a few compensation handlers, etc. And then it really makes you happy if you can reason your way out of that in BPMN, basically the process that you defined, rather than transforming that into another model that doesn't really fit with what you have modeled, basically. And there is this famous cartoon, which also you can't read. So basically this guy is saying, I can't even read it from here. He says, while our first, no, I can't read it.
Our framework must be really good.
He says, our framework must be really good. I'm just getting old, I can't read that. Jesus, okay. And then there is like two, don't do anything, and he says that, 500 plus stack traces, and he says yes. So that's a cartoon based on the software, the leaky software abstractions from Joel's Polsky. That's a law that's saying with every abstraction you go, you leak always something to the next layer, and that's true if you think about every layer. I mean, if you think about the low-level assembler, often it leaks something into the layer from the front, and you always leak something. And definitely in Activiti, we don't have 500 plus stack traces. Well, you could do that 500 plus stack traces. I can show you a way how to do it. But if you look at the stack trace, typically the lowest lines, they will be, PVM, Activiti input, stuff that doesn't say anything to you. And only the first lines will be actually pretty interesting, and those will be the ones that you typically want to have. So just a quick refresher about what we call the execution tree, just for the people that aren't well versed in that. So the way we store where you are in the process instance is basically the process instance start. We create this object called an execution entity, put it on the start. You continue, you go into the sub-process, you now have two execution objects. This one is a child of this one. You continue, this one, these two in parallel are now a child of this one. Anyway, you get how it goes. We basically have a tree representation of where you are in that process, and that's what we call an execution. For the people that know the BPMN spec, that matches one-on-one with the token concept in that spec. And that execution tree is being stored relationally, so we just slap it down and store it as rows. You can see very easily with basically parent ID, so we link those together, and when you want to know where you are, you basically fetch that execution tree in one go. And the problem with that execution tree is basically that our core goal from day one, 5 years ago, has been about getting that number of inserts as low as possible. So really we were focused on, we can't insert a new execution entity, we try to reuse and over-optimize that. So what happens, if you could now look in the code, is that there are lots of if-elses for very specific patterns, stuff that you don't expect there, but they are there to avoid having to delete and create a new instance and basically reuse the existing one. And it's very hard to look currently, so look at the database, and it's very hard for the complex processes to look at that tree and actually see it, how it's being mapped on the process definition. Even for us who do this daily, it's very hard to see that in very complex processes. But it turns out to be that if you want to have support for dynamic process instances, process definitions, then you need to have a clear structure. And because if your structure is clear, you can reason easier about, okay, I want to go now branch out dynamically and do something crazy and then come back. If your structure is simple and predictable, you can easily do that. If your structure is like it is now in 5, that requires a lot of hacking, basically. Could be done, but it's a lot of hacking, and with every hack comes another additional cost. For the third problem, quick API call refresher. I'm sure this is all familiar to the most of you. When you do an API call activity, you go through a service, you go through a stack of command interceptors. These basically create your transaction. These basically do all kinds of funny stuff for your environment. Your logic is being put into what we call a command, it's being given into a command context. You've got all these entity managers with the sole purpose of moving your process, sometimes removing a certain step, of moving your process, continuing, changing the state of your process to move on with what's happening. So basically every API call boils down, and now it gets a bit technical, so every API call boils down to manipulation of that internal model, the PVM model, and secondly, feeding that into what we call atomic operations. And these are the core state machine operations, basically. Now the problem is, and that's really a design flaw from day one, is that these are started from execution entity context. So whenever you continue your process, on the execution entity object, so in one of the elements of your execution tree, there is a stack of operations, and then on that stack there is a loop, and as long as there is stuff on that stack, you continue your process. At least as a theory, because what we have in 5 now, since day one, is that we have multiple stacks per execution object. Now you think that isn't a big deal, but I can show you, and I will show you in a few minutes from now, it means that some patterns can't be executed on the V5 engine. And we tried to fix that multiple times. I tried to fix that, Tijs tried to fix that, many other people tried to fix that, spend a lot of time on that, but it isn't possible without fixing the previous 2 problems. If your structure isn't clear, then you just can't fix that without a lot of hacking again. We tried once, we were very close, we only had a few hundred unit tests failing, but it wasn't pretty, so we just reversed it and then decided to do it properly. And the last problem is that, this is really a sloppy thing basically, I can't have any excuse for that, is that the entity logic, the persistence logic is kind of spread, grown organically everywhere. It's like we couldn't decide between using a DAO layer and an active record pattern. So you've got some entity code in your objects, entity objects, you've got some in our persistent managers, it's everywhere. The consequence of that is that it was really basically impossible. So I wasn't using this stick for the stick is here and it's like dirty or something, I don't know. Anyway, so it was really impossible to change the persistence layer in 5, which we found more and more people asking for doing it on NoSQL, for doing it on other graph database, for example, whatever. That was really impossible in V5. So, like I said multiple times now, we could have gone and tried to fix that on the V5 foundation, but it would always be a hack. And the problem with a hack is that you get away with it for a while, but with every new feature you add, you need to take into account that you did that hack. So with every extra hack you do, the feature gets more costly because of that mental thing you have to keep in mind of all the hacks. So it would get back to us in the long term. So we decided to solve these problems all at once, and they're really interconnected. So the one leaks into the other because that's the way we implement it basically. And so let the core engine evolve, which is I think a big enough change to call it a V6. So quickly, the solutions for that, I think I highlighted most of them, or hinted at least at them. So what do we do instead? I mean, you don't have to read it, it's actually, you can say the one line, is that instead of parsing it to this internal model is completely gone from the code base. We use what we call BPMN model, the Java representation of your process definition. We use that directly in everything. It's very simple, very easy to reason about. The execution tree, in the past, in 5, there are multiple types and flags on the execution tree, just a few. There's scoped, concurrent root, concurrent and concurrent root. And there's also concurrent parents, something that's different from root. Event, scoped, etc. Now in V6, we've got clear rules. The first rule is that entities, execution entities, are never reused. So the number 1 rule from 5, we dropped it, and we never reuse an execution entity. And secondly, there are now 3 kinds of execution entity objects in that tree. You've got regular ones, just being in a certain step of the process. You've got the root one, the process instance. The problem is that in 5, for example, the process instance often takes the role of a regular one and tries to visit, to get that 1 or 2 executions down. But now, very simple in 6, 1 execution for a process instance, and it doesn't visit anything. And that makes things much easier, because if you've got a root object to do stuff on, you could say, okay, I want to create 5 new tasks. They are related to the process instance, which means they live in the life cycle of the process instance, and they can die or live with the process instance. So it's very hard to do in 5. You could hack your way around it, but a process instance in 5 could be a regular execution, visiting a step. So you had a lot of if-else's if you want to do that. And then thirdly, we have the scope execution, which is basically whenever you visit something like an embedded sub-process, you get a scope. It's a scope for events being fired. It's a scope for variables, hopefully in the future. So basically, those are the 3. Those are the rules that we really follow. Once you have these rules, being dynamic becomes much easier. So I told you about the problem with the stack, multiple stacks on V5. There's now 1 centralized agenda per API call. So whenever you start an API call, internally there is an agenda being created, and we just use 1 agenda, 1 stack to do that. And the persistent code is pretty easy. What we have to do is we have to move all these persistence, we have to move all the persistence code to 1 interface, basically, which we hadn't done before, which is a huge amount of work still. We are halfway through, but it's still, it's amazing how much, if you don't care for doing a clear pattern there, which we didn't, that's really sloppy, like I said. It's really hard to now do that. But we'll do that, because it's our, how do you say it in English? I know the dirty Flemish version, but never mind. I won't translate it. So, high-level flow. API call comes in version 6 engine. Still have the same services as before. You have this interceptor stack as before. You've got a command, your logic being wrapped. You've got your command context. New is now the agenda. On the agenda, you've got the operations. It's similar to the little state machine that was in there. We don't call it a PVM anymore, but the idea is similar, that you've got operations that continue your process. The only big difference is that these operations, they work on BPMN constructs. They don't work on another model. On that agenda, you've got a run loop, kind of like your browser that, as long as there's work to do, it will do something. your command context as before gives you access to all the internal classes. And basically when you execute your command, or when new operations are being executed, they add basically stuff to that agenda. So we only have a couple, I think 7 or 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these low-level operations basically that continue the process. And that's basically a very high level of what a new way of executing a command or API looks like. I'll just show you quickly one example of that, if I can find it. No, wrong eclipse. Okay, now I have to do Command Shift T with one hand. Here we go. No task. I look like a manager now typing. And I'm in the wrong eclipse. God damn it. Here we are. Come on. No, this is not working. Yeah, the hint is getting through. This is the first contribution of Tijs to this presentation. Let's do it. I can't type with you. I can't type with you being so close to me. So basically what I want to show, this is the complete task command. So basically when you call the task service .complete to continue by completing a task, I'm just going to go into this method here. This is all stuff you shouldn't be worried about, mostly about events dispatching, but the main thing is that what happens here is that you get this command context, which is really a bag of stuff you're executing at the moment. Is that visible actually in the back? Yeah? Okay, good. So you delete the task because you want the task gone from the data, you don't want it to show up in the queries anymore. But here is where the new stuff basically happens, is that you ask the command context, give me your agenda, and plan what we call a trigger operation. A trigger operation is something that externally comes in and triggers your process for continuation. So at that point, it will plan on the agenda a new, you plan an operation, you simply put a new operation on the agenda, and that there is a run loop checking if there is new operations during your API call. As long as there is new stuff, it will continue. And the trigger operation, basically does nothing more, as you can imagine, than just checking if the behavior of your current step, the user task behavior at that point, is actually triggerable or not. If it's triggerable, it will call trigger. That's one thing we also changed, by the way. I don't know if you remember in 5, we've got this method called signal, but we also have signal concept of BPMN, and people were always very confused by it. And that was because in JPM 3, 4 we call it signal, and it just happened to be naming it the same thing. So we changed that actually, the signal, and all the signal stuff is now called trigger, except for the signal stuff of BPMN. So the signals are now real signals, and the stuff that was a signal, at least 2 people are nodding, so that must make sense. Yes. So thank you, that was it for now. I'm sure I will be able to use your services in the future. So, I think I said most of these things on the previous slide, is that because we reason now about BPMN structures and patterns, it's much easier to understand. Nothing is lost in translation. Execution tree is predictable. This is really what has changed in contrast with 5 and 6 is that in 5, often the cleanup here, that was hard. The cleanup, being able to say, okay, what execution needs to be deleted, what is the data associated with that was really hard, lots of if-else's. That is really simple now because we have a very clear structure with only 3 types of execution. I already said that leads to support for dynamic stuff. There are many smaller changes. I just highlighted the 4 big problems that we solved. There are many smaller changes that we did in the engine, and I really invite you to look at the 6th branch on GitHub. It's buildable, I think. Tijs, you pushed the jar file to me. There's a snapshot of 600 snapshot, I think it's called. Here's a snapshot on a solver type repository. So you can play around with it, but definitely, there are already people committing on it, which is fantastic. We didn't make any marketing or advertisement about it, but there are already people doing pull requests on Activiti 6 just out of the blue, which is fantastic. So I really invite you to do that. Just so you are with the cool kids now. Yes. I think, yeah. Ah, come on. Yes. So a quick example, just to show you that, from a high level point of view. I don't want to go into the, really nitty-gritty details. I mean, we can do that online on the forum or blogs. I'm definitely going to write all the stuff that I talk about now. We'll write blogs about that, and hopefully Tijs will write many more about that. More in detail about how it all looks like. So I'm going to give you a very simple example, how it looks like in 5 and how it looks like in 6. So what we have here is a very simple, the mother of all examples of approval. The process looks something like this. So it's not very specific. It's basically first a user task to select the people who will do the approval. You've got an embedded sub-process, something parallel going on. You wait here for something, I don't know what anymore. Here you do approval, there's a timer on that. On the big sub-process there is an error handler, error boundary event. There's a timer here again, and then at the end you do some service. Just to exercise, it's not really a process that we'll be using real, but just to exercise the API a bit. So, how does that look like in Activity 5? So, the API, the code for this, and let me open up the 6 example, is exactly the same. So if I do this, here, I even named the Vive version demonstrate Activity 6. So anyway, you can see that it's, I do some more research on 6, but it's pretty much the same. So let's go to the 5. I don't do anything very exotic. Deploy the process, start the process instance. I'm expecting one task, that's the first task here. Nope. I'm completing it, going into the big sub-process. I'm expecting then 2 tasks in parallel being shown. Again, these 2 here, I'm expecting to be shown. And then just asserting the right one, completing them, and then, assuming the process is done, and that's it. Now the thing I want to show is, probably, I already have a debug point here. See, it's there, and there's this trick, it's also in the user guide to open up the H2 in-memory database. One thing I just want to show you is the execution, which is completely empty, because I'm having the wrong debug point. Let's continue it, here we are. So we are now at the point where we had 2 tasks in parallel going on, some timers, some errors going on. So if you now look at that execution, and I don't know if that's really visible. No, it is. No, it is. So you've got a couple of executions, and the most interesting one, I'm not going to go to the parent-child relation here, but something is in null, which I assume he is on the embedded subprocess boundary. Something is in the subprocess fork for some reason. Something is in the wait for approval, that's the first task. The other one is here, and this one is, I assume that's a timer, or that's the error. Anyway, just want to highlight that it's not easy to see here in the 5, how is it mapped to your process definition. I would need to do some interpretation and some if-else in the logic to actually know what it looked like, right? So let's now take a look at the 6th version. So same process. Here we are. Again, going to debug. A cool thing is that we now have, if you write a unit test, we now get a new abstract activity test, which you can extend. It automatically will boot up the H2 web app for you, so I don't need to go into display and change it. Just something we could have done for 5 years already. Now we've done it finally. So if you now look at the execution, am I getting at the wrong point? Yep. Here we are. So again, 2 tasks in parallel there. If you now look at what's in the database, there are a few more. Like I say, we don't try to crazily have less inserts. No, we want to be more clear, and we will get the performance out of other things, which I will talk about later on. But basically, if you look at this, where are you? Well, this is our root process instance. There is one on the boundary, as I said, a scoped execution. To if you want to say this whole thing is done, you can just very easily in the database say, okay, kill it all. What's under this one? Very easy. This one is on the subprocess boundary. There's one in the error boundary event, something new now. In 5, it was sometimes implied that you were in a boundary event. Now it's very clear in the database. You are in a boundary event. You are in the timer boundary event. you are in the 2 tasks, and you are in the big, in the small one. So this one is a big timer event. If you go back, shoes, there you go. So you've got these 2, and you've got this, you've got 2 timers, and you've got 1 error event. So basically, it's just some reasons complete. My browser is doing this funny. So basically, the whole structure, I think it's fine now, for now. So the whole structure, I think, just a very simple example, becomes predictable, right? I mean, I can look at this, you can look at this, and you can see how this maps onto this is a very simple process, obviously, but by following those simple rules we have for execution types, it makes things much clearer. And I can now easily say, within this sub-process scope, because I know that this is the one on the sub-process, and every of the children of this one will be in the sub-process too. I can go dynamically say, okay, within this scope of the sub-process, do something crazy, right? And if the sub-process is done, stop with everything else. So it opens up a lot of stuff that wasn't possible before without hacking. Here we go, yeah. Right, okay, Tijs, sorry, I should have let you sit down, because the next thing is again code. But maybe Ivo should come, you know. No. Right. Interesting, very simple example. You've got a service task, start event, service task, to the gateway end. This one says if input is smaller than 1,000, then go back to the service task. Anybody has an idea what this will do on activity 5? Nobody, I'm sure you have tried that, no? Or activity 6 then, what does it do with activity 6? I'll tell you, in activity 6 it works. In activity 5, it gives you a stack overflow exception, indeed. And that's really the problem of that multiple stacks, because, without getting too technical, tail recursion wasn't implemented very well on those stacks, and I couldn't, too much logic was depending on it to change that. In 6 we changed it with our centralized agenda, and I'll just show you very quickly, with my dear assistant. Alright, so this is called the tail recursion test, activity 5, indeed. As you all said, a stack overflow exception. Here we go, stack overflow exception. And you can see why, because it just keeps looping. And 1,000 isn't that high to actually, yeah. Well, we couldn't fix it, like I said on the slide. Brave men have tried to do that and failed time. Without changing that we did in the 6 for the runtime structure, it's very hard to actually change that. Because I did try that agenda approach to fix it in the 5 version. There are workarounds for that, by the way. It's not that it's broken in 5, it's just that there are workarounds, but it's not natively pretty. 6 version keeps running until you can, it's very fast if you remove the debug. And it's green. Blue is green. I don't know what blue is now showing up here. Eclipse doing funny stuff. Anyway, blue Eclipse now. Anyway, it's green, so activity 6, it works. Stay here, got some more examples. I should have shown that first. That was basically to not offend the Star Trek fans for showing Yoda just a few slides back. I love you all, Trekkies and Warriors. That's an interesting one. So, I call this a tricky inclusive gateway. So, just going to try to explain what happens here. You've got the parallel gateway, 3 user tasks, whatever, doesn't matter, in parallel. You suppose now that these 2, they complete, they go into the inclusive gateway. This one completes, but this one goes into E. So for some reason the condition here is true and it goes to E. What happens on 5? Anybody has an idea? It's not a stack overflow. The process, indeed, that's the explanation. The process will never complete. It will be stuck somewhere, in a dark place where processes go to die, but it will never complete. In V6, as you would expect, I wouldn't put an example on there that fails on V6, obviously. Again, proving it. Here we go. On the V6, it's called nested subprocess. Oh, just to prove you that I'm not, not lying with the processes, just doing hello world process something. Oh, the inclusive gateway test. On activity 5, what does it do? So I've got this, just starting it, A, B, E, and then at the end, this is the use case I want to try actually, I've got A, B, C, I'm completing A, I'm completing B, not C, and then I check if I got one task available, and then I'm completing C. And then I'm verifying if I am actually past the inclusive gateway now, right? Because the inclusive gateway, it's kind of a tricky one. The inclusive gateway in the spec says that as long as you've got executions, tokens, that can reach me, I cannot be killed. When there is no more executions that can reach me, you can kill me. It's very hard actually to implement that feature. Actually, this came from a blog post from one of our partners called AP3 in the States, and they actually was a blog post of a year or two old where they highlighted that IBM something couldn't do this, and actually they tried on multiple other vendors, I think, and they couldn't do it either. So it's pretty cool that we can now support this. Well, I'll prove it to you that we can support it. So the same tests, we're now running it on the V6 engine. Here you go, it runs green. And the reason for that is that because we introduced new kind of behavior. You know, in Activity 5 we had the regular activity behavior, we had the simulable activity behavior, that's pretty much. We also got one sub-process behavior. Now we've got multiple ones. One of the new ones in V6 is the inactive activity behavior. It's kind of like a background thing. So just before the API call returns, it will actually check everything it visited before returning to the call. It will check if one of the steps being visited was something that had like background behavior. And an inclusive gateway has this background behavior implemented. So if you pass an inclusive gateway, just before it finishes, it will actually check, are there still executions that can reach me or not? And it will kill itself and put new operations on the agenda afterwards. You can't do that on 5 because once you return, it's done. The agenda is gone because it's on the execution object.
Sorry?
Yeah?
Does it propagate further if there are more steps in between?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Which is what you want.
I'm interested to see the code.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty simple. I can show you later on, but it is pretty simple. It is a combination of having the background behavior and having a centralized agenda. You could have the background behavior in Activity 5, but you wouldn't know where to put it because if you put it on the same execution entity as you just had to visit. The problem is that if you use the execution that completed the task, it won't know about all the other stuff. You could in theory fetch the database, check if there's inclusive gateway at that point. You could do that. I tried that, but it fails basically. I can show you the code. It's a combination of the structure and the agenda that now makes that possible. Which it's an edge case, but still it's something that the spec says you should be able to do. And the last example, Tijs, be happy that's the last example. I'll just walk for a minute. So there's a lot of nested sub-processes going on here. Actually, this is just to impress you because it doesn't do anything wrong. I mean, this is all the all works. It's actually this little bit here. Yeah, just nobody's impressed. Basically, a timer event without the gateway in between just goes to two different things. What will happen on Activity 5? Any of the experts have an idea? You can call a friend if you want to. No? On Activity 5, I'll tell you. On Activity 5, there will be one task active. It's going to be either A or B. I don't know the exact algorithm. Of course, on Activity 6 is going to be the two tasks. So, for the last time, I think yes. We are. It's called a nested sub-processes test. On Activity 5, there is this assertion. Very simple, you start the process, execute the timer here, and then assert that you got two tasks active, and that's going to fail on Activity 5, because only one will be active. And actually that is described also in the user guide as a bad pattern for Activity not to do that on the 5 engine. There's this picture with a big X on, which you can't, you're not supposed to do on Activity 5. Which is actually against the spec. So in the spec, you actually are allowed to do that. The default behavior for sequence flow going out of the step is to be in parallel. That's the default behavior, and it's not. Wasn't very clear in Activity 5 that would be possible everywhere. So these are just 3 examples, and once you know these patterns, you easily find more, but these were 3 main patterns that I had only like an hour at a time to find these, which I could find on Saturday night. So, right, oh sorry Tijs, I lied to you. I made you happy with the no, it's fine, I've got a few slides, you can rest a bit, but I will need your expertise soon. So, backwards compatibility is something that of course everybody cares about, and rightfully so. So, again, just to reiterate on what I said, in 6 there is backwards compatibility with API, DB schema, all your process definitions, they just are runnable as before. Your Java delegates, their logic is the same. Integration with other frameworks is the same. Feature-wise is the same. The way that we embed the engine is the same. The concepts is the same. So if you're an expert in 5 today, you'll be an expert in 6. As I showed you, it's really the core engine that we revised, redid to be able to support more use cases and features in the future. Minor stuff that is not backwards compatible is really small stuff. At least that's what I say, of course, because I'm not going to say it's huge work. But basically, we changed the method signature for Java delegates and activity behaviors because, in 2015 nobody has checked exceptions anymore, so we thought it would be cool not to have them anymore. If you've got checked exceptions, you have to handle them yourself now. So by default, the old Java delegate had throws exception, it's gone from the new one. If you have activity behaviors, you've got custom activity behaviors that call some PVM calls. Typically that will be activity impl to get some properties to put some stuff on. That won't work anymore. You have to do something else, and there is an example already for that, how to do that. The same for BP event parse handles, but typically in activity behaviors, the use cases for activity, for the low-level PVM data structures are not that big. But definitely in the BP event parse handlers, they often use, if you got, like the last presentation, you saw that was done with the BP event parse handler, and most likely they will go into the low-level. Because you're parsing to that internal model, right? So that parse handler is parsing to that internal model. So that will need some small changes to work on the new stuff. And lastly, 2 other minor things is that if you've got queries that depend on a certain number of executions, as I showed you, that won't work anymore, obviously, because the execution structure has changed. And also assuming, what many people do when they have simple processes, assuming that the process instance is the execution is the one execution you get back. It's not true, because we now at least always have 2 is the process instance and the one execution visiting all the steps in the process. And Tijs is going to write a migration guide soon.
Sorry?
Yeah?
Does the first item need the BPM and exception? If you
No.
The BPM and exception is dead.
Yes. Yes. I say yes because we have unit tests for that and they pause, so yes. Isn't there a runtime exception?
But this BPM and exception which is converted to the business.
Yeah, but I think it's a runtime exception deep down. Oh, yeah. No, we need to check. But I'm sure because the unit tests for error all pause, so it's sorry? BPM and error, sorry, yes. That's it. No, it's not the same. No. So yes. You want the mic? No. So, how does it work, the backwards compatibility? It works like any upgrade from 5 to any other update from 5. So you just drop the jar into your transport. If you're using the auto upgrade of the database at least, it will automatically update your database to the 6 version, or you use the DDLs that we always ship to do it manually. The one thing we do is during that upgrade, so you drop in the jar, you restart your server, and it will basically tag it or put a sticker on all the existing process definitions and all the existing deployments that are in your database. It will put a sticker on that hey, this is an activity 5 process definition. And just explain why that is necessary. There are 2 reasons for that. So let me just explain to you how it works. So you do an API call, for example, start a process instance, goes to the activity 6 engine, fetches the database fetches the process definition of the database, and it sees that it's a 5 process definition because it slapped a sticker on that during the upgrade. At that point, the Activity 6 engine will see this and say, oh, this is a 5 process definition. I will give it to what we call a mini 5 engine that runs within the Activity 6. So basically, you've got 2 engines, but don't worry, this one shares all the resources with this one. So there are no 2 different configurations. They share the same configuration, they share the connection pooling, they share all kinds of resources. And at that point, the 5 engine will actually produce a V5 process instance. The idea there is, well, 2 things. Sometimes you're just not ready to migrate for the old process instance, you just want to keep them running. And secondly, just to cover our own asses, because if we made a mistake in the 6 engine, we can always say, oh, but just use the V5 mode fallback and then it's all fine. It gives us some time to fix it. The same applies, I mean, this is for the start process engine, but the same applies for every touch point where you continue the process, right? The completion of the task, signaling events, jobs, and all those touch points, they're basically in there. Oh yeah, I already said that there are shared resources. So basically, how do you enable that? Very simple. We've got a new module, new dependency in Maven called Activiti5 compatibility. The moment you drop that jar on your class bot, it will enable the backwards compatibility engine for you. You don't have to do anything. The idea is that all process instances keep running against 5. The reason for that is actually another third reason, is that the runtime structure is different, right? We don't want to go into the long work of trying to migrate all that data. You know, if you get a 5 structure, try to migrate to a 6 structure, that will be hard to get all the use cases. It would be simple for most of processes, but very hard to get it correct for everything. So we basically decided that all processes keep running against 5, unless you say from day 1, I upgrade to Activiti 6, I deploy my new version, so simply call it the deployment service, right? Saying deploy new version of my same process instance. At that point, it won't have that sticker anymore, the V5, and your new instances will be running against V6 rather than V5. But existing processes will always run against V5. That's the idea. So if you depend on that to work, that will keep on working. And if my lovely assistant can assist me. He's doing a great job, people give him an applause. Special for you. Right, so let me show you which Eclipse do I need? This one. So this is, what am I looking for? Right. So this is a very simple test. So I've got 2 modules here. I've got a module called Activiti5 compatibility test data. That's a module that basically has some data generators. So if you go into the POM, you will see that it has a V5 517 dependency. This is running against the current, stable release of Activiti5. And what it will do, it will deploy a certain process, and just start a process instance, against V5, right? And I got a few more of these data generators here. And then I've got a module called Activiti5 compatibility test, and the test basically assumes the data that was produced in Activiti5, the previous module, right? So this test depends on the test data being generated by the previous module. And I'm just going to go through it. So let me just generate that test data. Here we go. And then executes. I'm just going to go step through it and explain what happens with the debugger. And make this bigger. All right, so we're now in a situation where we generate. So I'm using a MySQL database. I can show you that. No, it's closed. Should have prepared that better. Here we go. Where we have some data for. Here we go. We've got some data from Activiti5, right? We generated that in the previous module. So what we're doing now is we assert basically that, we've got one task with a certain process instance, business key that we assume. We assert that, why is that stupid console showing up here? We assert that there is one process instance, one certain process definition. If we now start one, like I said, as long as you don't say, I want to migrate to V6, I'm deploying a new version of my process definition, and for example, change that throws exception behavior, you will start it in 5 mode. So you start a process instance, we check if you've got 2. Now, of course, now I have the lazy version, so there is this lazy initialization version of the engine. So that's what happened now. I didn't have the 5 mini engine running. I could have done it eagerly, but for this test I didn't. So just continue, 2 process instances, 2 tasks, as I assume. For Activiti5, like I said, we reuse the process instance execution to visit all the steps And we know for this simple process that there will only be one. So that's the execution query we're doing here, that there should be only one, right? Completing a task in V5 mode should just complete your process instance in V5 mode, etc. And now we're at the point that, we're confident, we've changed our logic, we've done our unit tests like every good developer does, and we're redeploying the process definition, right? So here we do exactly the same. Sorry, we're not there yet. We have this thing called, if you're the anxious, non-adventurous developer, we have a new deployment property called deploy as activity 5, and that's also to cover our assets, right? If it doesn't work on 6, we're so confident it will work on 6. So what happens here is we deploy a new version, but we said do it in 5 mode. We're not yet ready to migrate, let's say. Even though migrating is not a hard thing, but it's Friday afternoon. And you're at your work and you don't want to migrate. Anyway, we're now at the point Monday morning we want to migrate. We deploy it now as a new process. And here we go. We got now 3 versions, right? One from the test data, one from I just did it as a 5 compatible version, and now we have one in the 6 version, right? We assert that the sticker is actually null, so the sticker is called engine version. We start a process instance, we now have 3 tasks, and we kind of expect now 2 executions versus the one from activity 5. This is to actually verify that we actually started in activity 6. And now you will see if you go to your database that you will have a mix of those 2 in there. Now, how does this work? Let me very simply show you task commands here. So, very high level, basically, if your task has a process definition ID, we fetch it from our cache of process definitions. We check whether it's an activity 5, process definition, so we actually check that sticker, so does it have the activity 5 engine tag, yes or no? If so, we fetch our activity 5 compatibility handler. This is all pluggable, so if we didn't do a good job, you're going to plug your own handlers, you're going to put your own factories in there to cope with that. And basically you say to the 5 engine, hey, you go ahead and complete that task in 5 mode. The default implementation of that will actually just call the activity 5 task service and complete the task. So you see it's definitely not rocket science, but it's, thank you, very well done. It's actually the safest way for us to make sure that we don't screw up your process instances. I mean, typically the companies, they rely on these to be very stable, so we don't want to make any mistakes there. When you're ready to move that process definition to activity 6, you will be able to do so. But as long as you don't, you will keep running on 5. Of course, new process definitions, new process definition you deploy, they will be started on activity 6. Right, this is the part where hopefully I use that for just 2 slides. It's too complicated for me. Right, how are we doing with time? Yeah, fine. So Tijs, this is where you also come in, because I'm really thirsty and need some drinks. So, roadmaps and wild ideas. So you saw what's there. We're now at the point where all our unit tests they're working against, whatever worked on V5 works on V6. We started implementing some cool stuff already, but most of it is 99% done or less. But we've got a lot of stuff on the what I call roadmap. I'm not going to call it roadmap. Roadmap is something for salespeople and marketing people, and it has a certain kind of certainty to it, which, as you all know, in software there are no certainties. So I would rather call it well-worked-out ideas, half-baked ideas, and dreams. And we'll have, as Paul said, a roadmap or an idea and dream session after this presentation. So if you see something or you think something that triggers you to think about something else, take a mental note, and then we got a long time to discuss that all together. Because that's really what this is about. This is what we did. We also want to hear that what's the stuff that you guys want to do. I mean, we definitely saw a trend today in the presentations. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I definitely see a trend about the Elasticsearch usage, about the analytics, etc. So that's definitely interesting to know. Again, we know about that only when we come to a conference like this. It doesn't happen on the forum, because there you always see the stack trace they will get. So, one of the things that we work on, Tijs, you can, I'm going to swap between you and me now, I'm really thirsty. So, one of the things we're working on is we're working on that together with the team from Imran. sitting there. So we're working on what's something called bulk insert and delete, and the idea is really to lower the time to go to the database. So the team of Imran found that I think you just explained to me, if you have a data center failure and you need to move to a new data center, and that suddenly the data center has a way higher latency than the original one, then you do care about the amount of times you go to your database, right? Typically, it doesn't happen if you've got everything on-premise sitting next to your service next to each other, but in high-scale environments, it does make a huge difference. So bulk insert and delete, that's really something we're working on. The team of Imran has given us some code to review and to do a pull request on. We invested some time in looking into bulk delete. Bulk delete means that we could kill the execution tree, delete it in one go, in one query, rather than doing it in 6 or 7, depending on the tree size. And the idea is, of course, we need to measure it. The idea is that going to the database lesser will have a better impact on performance. Another thing we're trying at the moment is avoiding delete queries if there's no data. So for example, in Activiti now, we always do the query to delete your tasks, your jobs, whenever the execution is destroyed. And we could keep that state somehow. It does open up new issues with optimistic locking and other stuff. But we should be able to do something there to be smarter about the amount of deletion queries, at least, that people do. Also, one of the things that we played around now is reordering. I don't know, some of the versions of Activiti, you could trick the engine in having a wrong order of deleting execution tree for elements of the execution tree. And it's something we now fix because we have a fixed ordering system in place. It was actually, I don't know why we did it 5 years ago, because we own let's say the data layer, so we know exactly our use cases, we know our entities, we could know perfectly what the order would be, but for some reason we decided not to do it. And Tijs wants to make a remark.
So another thing, so it's a bit related to avoiding the delete queries when it's not necessary. But what we do in Activiti 5 is when we delete a user task, we delete the boundary events to that user task, we delete the identity links to that user task, and some other things as well. And a boundary event might not even be present on that user task. You know, in the BPMN definition is a boundary event attached to this user task. So we can now look, because we know on the execution what's the current flow element, we can look in the BPMN model, does this user task have a boundary event, and only then we need to delete this boundary event execution. So only also with this kind of additional logic, we can decrease the amount of delete queries, I think, quite a bit. Of course, when there is a boundary event present, we still have to delete it. So it's made basically for the more simple cases where we can optimize some things.
That's all for me too.
Yeah. So with the new Activiti 6 engine, so all the stuff that Joram has been blathering about. So what does it really bring for you as an end user? There are quite a bit of requests to increase the amount of BPMN support in Activiti, and sometimes it's a bit just to have a flag that we can say we support all elements in the BPMN spec. I don't know, no, it's not even on this. So there's a complex event gateway, for example. And the complex event gateway in the BPMN spec just says you can build your own logic to do something with this gateway. So you can basically implement everything there. So the only thing we have to do as an engine is to implement this complex gateway, provide a class attribute or a spring bean or an expression, and you can go ahead and implement everything you want. But that's already possible by overriding something in the BPMN parse handler or something else. So there's no additional value in some of the BPMN constructs, to our opinion. We are always open up for discussion to talk about that, but we think these are the next ones we should work on. And the new Activiti 6 engine makes it a lot easier to implement these additional features. So for example, the ad hoc sub-process, that's a whole topic on itself. Who of you did look into the CMNN spec? So the CMMN spec is a bit more loosely coupled, so it's a bit more ad hoc. So it basically says, I have this sub-process or I have this scope, and this task can be created, task A, but also B and also C, but they are not required and they don't have to be there in sequence, so you don't have to have some flows connected to them. But when you are in that scope, you can create task A, B, and C. And in BKMN, in the really formal way, it's really difficult to design these kind of more loosely coupled kind of definitions. There's no real possibility to say in this scope you can start task A, B, or C, or you have to do some complex things in BKMN. So the ad hoc ad hoc sub-process allows you to do these kind of things. And with the new engine, I think we are ready to implement quite a couple of use cases in the ad hoc sub-process. So also event sub-process. Right now, these are always interrupting, and there are a lot of use cases to make it non-interrupting. And you just want to execute some logic, but the process has to continue just like it should be. And in the old engine, it was quite difficult to implement it, and right now it's just a couple of lines and it will work. So yeah, a lot of.
Remind you of that.
Yeah.
It's just a couple of lines.
Oh, it is. It really is a couple of lines. So we will work on these additional pieces of BPMN support in the next couple of months. So you will see some more work here. And please, if you think there's some BPMN construct that we should implement, it's not on the list, just give us a shout and we will think about it. Or you can contribute. Do you want to?
No, you're doing a great job. Absolutely, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so that's another major topic. So I think some people already touched upon this. You have this process definition, version 1. You create 100 process instances with it, and you see, oh fuck, I made this mistake, and I want to deploy this new version, and I would like all these 100 process instances to be executed against this new process definition. And that's already possible in version 5 by doing some internal call, so it's not really part of the API, but we do offer a set process definition version command that you could execute. But we want to improve a lot more and really provide some API to change the version for a specific process definition. Maybe also say I'm now in this state of the process, but I should be 2 steps further, or I should be 2 steps. I want to go 2 steps back. With the new execution model, that's something we can calculate, and yeah, that's becoming possible. So more dynamic behavior of the state of the process instance and the process definition.
Difficult topic, so for me. No, so about variables. Now we've got 2 types of variables in the engine. Basically global ones, process instance scope, then you've got the local ones. Don't be upset about it.
Variables is awesome.
Yes? 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 Yeah. He's happy, that's all you have to know. So we were thinking about adding new, keeping the 5 semantics, introducing a new scope one. Now having the scope execution is fairly easy to have variables within the life cycle of an embedded subprocess, for example, a call activity much easier. Call activity is already possible in Activity 5, but the mapping is quite cumbersome. So we are thinking about adding a new kind of variable mapper, both for multi-instance and call activity, that whenever the multi-instance is done or the call activity is done, you give it to, now you have to do it like in the BPMN XML, you have to map it in out parameters. It's very cumbersome, to be honest, and ideally we would still support that, but we also have like a Java mapper or a script mapper that allows you to basically map to whatever you want and do whatever you want with those variables. That's something we hear a lot on the forums, at least, that for call activity that's a pain in the ass, and we need to fix that. Another thing is system variables. System variables are variables that you don't want to give to your user. They're not interested in it, but you need them for service task execution, for example. You know, some parameter, some URL for calling a REST service. But you don't want them to show up in the queries when you query them for populating your forms or giving them to your users. Last one, transient variables. The use case for transient variables is, for example, you get in a call from a web service that calls into a process, you receive that, and you've got a few steps afterwards that do something with that variable. Now suppose that the thing you get in from the REST service is a big JSON, big XML, big whatever, right? If you get that in, you don't want to store that in Activiti. Now you would. You could hack your way around it by keeping it somewhere in an object. But actually what you want to do is you want to store it the same way you store your variables. You want to say execution.setVariable. And then in the next steps you want to say get variable of that same thing. But you don't want to store it in your database because it doesn't make sense. You only are interested in a certain piece of the data, or you're just transforming it or whatever. That's the use case for transient variables, and I don't think it's hard. It's very easy to implement those transient variables. What we have. You've got a remark on that?
No. So we are almost ready with this session, and we can go on with a couple of slides, but maybe it's also good to open up for questions and see what you think about it, and then we can go back to these slides in the roadmap session. So we will have a 50-minute break in 5 minutes or so. So are there any questions about all this?
I'm just happy with the contact variable. It's awesome.
I'm happy you're happy.
Let's see.
I'm happy that you are happy that he's happy.
What a happy community we are.
What happens, I'm sure that in the version 5 you did not reuse the instance because of your own amusement. There was some performance aspect.
Sure.
And does this mean that you are losing that performance aspect
No,
in version 6?
no. That's a good question. And where's the microphone?
It's a good question. So he was asking that by having less inserts that you would lose performance. And if you would keep the same structure basically, or don't do anything special, yes, then we would lose performance because you have more database traffic. But we're doing some other smart stuff. At the same time, for example, the bulk stuff, which we'll try to port to 5 also. But there are some tricks that we want to apply, keeping the state more, if you take a look at the simple process, for example, most of the time it's actually spent in trying to clean up everything. It's quite amazing. It's not inserting it, but it's cleaning up all the things. If you just a one-step process, most of the time spent in cleaning up. So as you can see in the previous slides, we spent a lot of time in trying to optimize that deletion, and we're going to fix that more. So my assumption is, what I believe is that once we fix that completely, the performance will be, I hope, better than Activiti 5, because the inserts in the end don't matter that much. I mean, inserts are typically pretty cheap for a database, but it's finding for delete that right thing. Insert is just, for database, insert is just writing it on this kind of certain place and maybe calling a few indexes, but deletion, often you do a delete, and you need to find it in the index, you need to find it, and sometimes you cascade. That's where a lot of the work is being in. So I'm quite confident that it will overperform what we have in 5. But of course, the proof is in measuring that. That's something we definitely have to do. But you can't compare it right now at the moment. Probably now at the moment, for the simple ones, 6 will be slower, and I'm sure I can find a lot of processes where 6 will be faster because of the new structure. Because it's also not true that I can probably hook up a few processes that have more executions in V5 than in V6 because of some constructs in 5. So it's not a black and white story basically. It depends on the process, but I'm sure we can find tricks around that to fix that.
So you used to have a very interesting benchmarking
Yes.
between some versions.
No, absolutely. We're going
I assume that you are going to continue.
Continue that and with more processes, more use case. Absolutely, that's been on my to-do list for 2 years now. So, but definitely with the 6, that is something we want to do. We also want to measure it on Amazon on different environments with different databases. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to that.
Just to have an idea, how long you are going to maintain the 5th branch?
Yeah, so we don't have an exact date for that yet, but of course this is a new version. We didn't even release it yet, so we will first go into beta and beta 1, 2, 3, 4. So it will be for quite a long time that we will maintain 5. And of course, when there are pull requests on 5, that will continue always, basically. But maybe the bunch of the work, or the most of the work, will be focusing on version 6 more and more. But right now it's just, like Joram was saying, some stuff that we are doing on version 6, we also port that back to version 5 as well. So it's now a joint thing for at least quite a considerable amount of time. And it's also based on feedback, of course. So if people really want to stick with version 5, and that's 60% of our users, then it's important for us as well, of course. So we don't want to force people to version 6 or something like that. It should be your choice because it's better and more performant and things like that. Yep.
So if you submit a pull request today on 2.5,
Yeah.
use one of these submitted pull requests to 2.5 and 6.
So the
that
code
would be ideal.
so
If I could choose.
the code has changed quite a bit. So to have that, so it's always nice to have pull requests against 5 and 6 if it's possible. But yeah, it's there are quite a bit of code changes. So yeah, I can imagine that some people won't do it like that. But yeah, it's always nice to have. Yeah. Imran?
Yeah, I'm very good, guys. So this might be a stupid question, but it seems like some of the performance issues are because of the schema that we're on. Would this be a good time to, if you take away the restriction of processes started in 5, being able to run at 6, so process started in 5, do finish in 5, and since we're tagging it, could we maybe evolve the schema upgrade in our backwards compatible manner?
Sure.
This seems like a good time to do that.
No, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree. And there is some.
There is. That's a very good point, and there is. I think definitely around variables and history. I think we should do a bit there. Definitely around history, we should revise quite a bit there, and we're going to do that. That's for sure. But if you've got findings or things you wanna, that now is a good moment. I mean, backwards compatible schema means that it can be upgraded from 5x to 6. But I can show it later to you. The upgrade file now has like 5 lines of changes that we're doing now from 5 to 6. But there's no problem. And we do it in every version, even between 5.16 to 5.17. We did a database change. Now is the perfect time. You've got a perfect excuse which you can hide behind to do that. Absolutely.
So it's time for a well-deserved break, I think, with all the stuff you've been hearing. But so that's a 1.5 hour and 50 minutes, I think, roadmap session planned from 3:45. So there's plenty of opportunity to ask more questions about this. But let's enjoy our 50-minute break and continue at 3:15. Thank you.